so I guess I'll get started and, we'll send them in from the parking lot or whatever we need to do. So for those of you who don't know who I am, that's a good thing. But I'm Steven Bechtold. I'm District Superintendent for the Skylands District for the next 7 months. And I've lost track of the days and stuff. And I've been asked to share with you today about the proposal from the Commission on the Way Forward that's come through the Council of Bishops and is going to the General Conference. And the 3 plans that have been sent forward. I'll be speaking a little bit about a 4th plan that has been presented. So I've been given 30 minutes for this, so I'm going to ask if you've got questions or so to hold them so I'm going to speak as fast as I can and try to get as much in as possible. Just a little background about the Commission on the Way Forward was appointed by the Council of Bishops after the 2016 General Conference, specifically to deal with developing a proposed legislation that will move us forward. For 40 years, every General Conference has gotten bogged down dealing in issues of human sexuality. And this was to set this commission and bring it back to either a special session or the next session of the General Conference. The Council of Bishops voted to call a special session that will happen in February of 2019. The Commission proposed 3 plans initially. The Council of Bishops said 2 of the 3 plans we really want you to develop, which they did. And then at their final meeting with the Council of Bishops, the Commission was told, oh, we want you to develop the 3rd plan too. So the 3rd plan, which is the traditionalist plan, I'll explain that, was actually just fleshed out probably in about a 2-week period from the beginning of, somewhere around the beginning of May 2nd or 3rd to the 16th. So that was just part of it. So let me just go through these 3 plans. I'm going to do my best to try to be objective in presenting what's in each plan. I have my biases, so if you don't like my biases, please wave your hand and throw something at me. But I'm going to try my best, okay? The first one is the One Church plan. This has been the plan that a large majority, probably around 80% of our bishops, have said this is the plan we want to see moving forward. The One Church plan removes, and there are some notes about these in here, it removes language from the Book of Discipline that's used in the United States that restricts pastors and churches from conducting same-sex weddings, and language that limits annual conferences from ordaining self-avowed practicing homosexual persons. It will remove language that states that homosexuality is inconsistent with Christian teaching. So remove all of that language. It will add language that protects the religious freedom of pastors and churches who choose not to perform or host same-sex weddings, and boards of ordained ministries and bishops who say we do not want to credential or ordain a self-avowed practicing homosexual person. Central conferences. These are the conferences outside of the United States, are already free to adapt the Book of Discipline as they wish. So really anything we're talking about is only going to have a practical effect on the church in the United States. That's a little challenging for some of us. Okay, my bias is coming out here now. The global church votes, and the United States has to follow what the global church decides. Okay, enough said. Got to be careful. So with the One Church plan, by removing the language, the restrictive language, what happens is that United Methodists have the ability to address their missional contexts in different ways. Funding for the episcopacy, which is a big deal in this whole conversation will come from the jurisdiction and not through the general church. That's not going to matter to most local churches. We have this thing called an Episcopal fund. And there are, particularly after the consecration of Bishop Karen Oliveto in the Western jurisdiction, other jurisdictions say, well, we don't want to pay her salary. And what they're saying is, okay, each jurisdiction will pay their own bishops. It allows central conferences to either maintain their current stances in their own books of discipline, because they each adapt the discipline. So they maintain their current stances, or they can change them. It will move away from utilizing church trials, and because it will no longer be chargeable offenses. And it's going to move us not only, particularly in dealing with these specific issues, will not remove all church trials, because there are other circumstances that are chargeable. But this is the one that is getting a lot of press and a lot of time, and costing the church a lot, not just in money, but also in spirit. So it will move us away from that. We'll have to make about 17, give or take, changes in the Book of Discipline, but no constitutional amendment changes. And it does not require any local church to vote or affiliate any other way, and therefore allows the opportunity for the church to evolve in its understanding without having to realign its affiliation. And so with this plan, the church is at one place and says, oh, we're just not comfortable, but in the movement of the Spirit, as time moves forward, they say, hey, we're not there anymore. The church has changed. People are, the people we know are changed. The church can just easily do that, and it doesn't require realigning with a different conference or denomination. The second plan is the Connectional Conference Plan. The Connectional Conference Plan reflects a unified core of shared doctrine and services. The plan creates 3 value-based connectional conferences, and these are the words of the report, not mine, that have distinctive definitions of accountability, contextualization, and justice. Current central conferences, those outside the United States, have the choice of becoming their own connectional conference, and there can be up to 5 additional connectional conferences, or joining one of the 3 value-based connectional conferences. And then the Council of Bishops is redefined. Some of the hallmarks, the 3 connectional conferences are defined as traditional, unity, and progressive. And then all 3 of them meet together as a general conference, but it's a shortened general conference. The traditional connectional conference, marriage then becomes defined as between one man and one woman. Same-sex weddings cannot be performed. Those practicing homosexuality cannot be ordained. Along with a covenantal commitment to a more traditional understanding of the doctrinal and moral standings of the church with enhanced accountability. That's a quote from the report. The Unity Connection Conference, which acknowledges that members are not of one mind regarding biblical interpretations related to human sexuality. Pastors are allowed but not required to perform same-sex weddings. Annual conference are allowed but not required to ordain those practicing homosexuality. Local churches are allowed but not required to receive an LGBTQ person as pastor, and in which no bishop, pastor, or congregation is compelled to act against conscience in these matters. And then the Progressive Connectional Conference, same-sex weddings are performed by all clergy, all annual conferences ordain qualified LGBTQ persons, and all local churches welcome LGBTQ pastors who match the needs of the congregation and its ministry. So those are the 3 connectional plans. We would be divided. Now we have 5 jurisdictions. Now there would be like these 3 jurisdictions, but they would be all across the United States, and would be affiliated based on where you are with that. Each connectional conference would create its own book of discipline. Did I just roll my eyes? Stop. Okay. And that would include the articles of religion, the confessions of faith, the general rules, etc. Justice ministries related to racism and sexism would be organized at the connectional conference level and held accountable by the general church. Local churches, clergy, and annual conferences would each have to vote to decide which connectional conference they want to affiliate with. And then clergy are able to transfer to the other connectional conferences, as can local churches. So if you have one local church that says we don't like where our annual conference is, well, we're going to affiliate with another annual conference. And they can do that, which could mean we could have districts that go over many, many states, who knows. And this would require at least 9 constitutional amendments. So if this were to be adopted, it then has to be adopted, each of those amendments, by 2/3 vote of the general conference and 2/3 aggregate vote across the whole denomination. So it's a complicated process. And then at least 6 other disciplinary changes to start with, but then we'd have to go back and each of the connectional conferences has to write their own book of discipline. So one has no idea what that's going to mean. The traditionalist plan largely maintains all the current language in the Book of Discipline regarding human sexuality, but it expands the definition of a self-avowed practicing homosexual. So right now, that's all it says. It now starts defining that more carefully or more further. It requires that just resolutions must include a commitment by the offender not to re-offend, and implements mandatory sentencing for persons who violate the provisions of the discipline dealing with same-sex marriages and ordination of LGBTQ persons. Annual conferences and local churches would have to vote to uphold the Book of Discipline in its entirety, and those who do not vote are, and the language is used, invited to leave the United Methodist Church to form concordant or affiliate denominations or churches. These votes are all by simple majority, so that's 50% plus 1. Local churches would not be bound by the decision of the annual conference. So if the annual conference says, this is how we're going to go, and we're going to say the annual conference votes to not uphold all the provisions of the discipline, it could become an independent, a concordant denomination, like Methodists of New Jersey or New York, whatever that would be. But if the local church didn't want to be part of that, they could stay with the traditionalist United Methodist Church and join that. This would require 17 disciplinary changes, so they all would have to go into place. And there's a 2-year period of which everything has to be done. So that by 2021, everybody has to make up their mind and go somewhere. There's a 4th plan that did not come through the Council of Bishops, but has been submitted and is part of the legislative process for the special session of General Conference, and that's called the Simple Plan. This just removes all the language from the Book of Discipline, period. It's called the Simple Plan because it's not making provisions here, there, and everything. It's just like, it's gone. It adds no language to protect annual conferences, bishops, clergy, or churches who, because of their own discerning of conscience, choose not to ordain clergy or perform same-sex weddings, or prohibit use of church facilities for same-gender weddings. And basically, this would happen by amending the discipline by deletion. Just going to take everything out. I have not seen in what I've read, because it did not come up in any of the stuff. And honestly, it's church conference season, so I haven't had time to read everything that's out there. But what I've been reading does not seem to me that there's going to be anything that will added with it. Understand, though, that because central conferences have the ability to adapt and basically write their own books of discipline, this, again, only applies within the United States. There are a lot of other petitions that have been submitted to the General Conference to do all sorts of things. Some are seeking to make the church more restrictive, others, anything and everything. And the way the General Conference will work is they will be given these plans. The report, the recommendation from the Council of Bishops is for the one church plan. However, it's then up to the body to do with it as it wishes. So what we don't know is what anything's going to look like at the end of General Conference. I've often said, this is not around this issue. When you have up to 1,000 people writing a book in just a couple days, it's really hard to know exactly what will happen with that. There is one issue that will come up, and that is that it's going to need to be addressed, and that's what is being termed as a graceful exit. It is anticipated that whatever is decided, or if none of the plans are adopted, which is a possibility, they could just say when nothing gains a majority, that there are going to be clergy, but particularly local churches, that are going to choose to exit the denomination. We right now have something called the trust clause, so it's not so easy just to take your assets and leave the denomination. And that is something that is up for discussion and debate as to how we do that. The Book of Discipline currently provides a method for that. Basically, it gets negotiated on a church-by-church basis. And there's all sorts of things that have been speculated about and what's going to happen. In all sincerity, God only knows. God only knows. What I do think, and what I am praying for, is that as the General Conference meets, they'll really be in a time of discernment. I was personally very dismayed by the 2016 General Conference. And the first thing that kind of angered me is it took 3 days to adopt the rules. And the reason was they were trying to propose a means of doing discernment and conversation around these very issues that the Commission and the Way Forward it has addressed. They were seeking to do a way that was more conversational and sought discernment rather than just decision making. It took them 3 days to just vote all that down and say, no, we do everything by Robert's Rules of Order. And the problem with Robert's Rules is Robert's Rules are developed for secular organizations around decision making. It's a little hard sometimes for Robert's Rules to be open enough to let the Spirit work. And so it's like, who's going to get the floor? Who's going to say this? Who's going to say that? Debate's limited to this many speeches for and this many against. That kind of stuff doesn't allow the Spirit to work. So my prayer is that there will be more of a conciliatory, more of a conversation that will happen. And people will really listen to each other. And that as the Spirit works there. I actually did this faster than I thought. But let me start then and see if you have questions about anything that I've shared so far. Yeah.
Suppose the connectional plan went in. Okay, that was one of us. How do you know when you go visiting, so you're traveling, and you want to go to church, how do you know which church is which church? The progressive and traditional? Will they not have the United Methodist Church name again?
They'll all have the United Methodist Church. That's a great question. I think we ought to ask the general conference. You know, I mean, in all seriousness, that's one of the challenges with the connectional plan. We could have, this is not the first time in our denomination we've had this kind of a setup. We had something called the Central Conference, which was the jurisdiction for all of our African American churches across the country. And that kind of, just from it's not just a practical level, it's also a spiritual issue. You could have two United Methodist churches literally across the street from each other. They were not in the same annual conference. They were not in the same jurisdiction. The pastors were not in connection with each other. Now, they could choose to be, but in terms of what the denomination was saying is, you are not the same. So we could go to a place, probably in this district, well, let's look at Dover. Dover has two churches in it. They could be in different annual conferences in different jurisdictions or connectional conferences, and yet be 4 blocks apart. So that's one of the challenges of the plan. What some would say the benefit of it is it allows each church to make its own decision.
Just a quick question. I'm thinking about how churches sometimes evolve in their understanding. So you choose this connectional conference and then say 10 years, 15 years down the road, feelings and attitudes change. Are you stuck?
Well, another good question. Let's ask the general conference, okay? As I read it, you would have to knock on the door of the other connectional conference and say, will you take us in? And who knows where that other connectional conference may have evolved over those years too.
And what would force any one church to continually reevaluate their position? Like, would that vote, that decision be made annually, that they keep revisiting where are we at today? Or does somebody have to try to muster up the troops and say, let's change the idea?
As I read it, the second option would be it. You know, it's kind of like a, you know, make your decision, decide where you're going to be, and that's it. And then the church would have to be able to muster up feeling that, well, I think we should go to a different connectional conference. Sorry.
Steve?
Yes.
You know, one thing that I'm feeling is, as a health professional, I had to act a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
And as I evolved in being a lesbian and happily married for 20 years, I was more comfortable, and yet the people in the church got to know me just as Linda. And I think that the Methodist Church is all over as time evolves and people are living a little bit differently and more in love and not so much in fear, that they can look at a woman like me or my wife Joanne and say, you know what? Them queers are pretty cool. You know what I mean? It's how you look at me. I'm allowing you to evolve because it took me a lot of years to evolve into who I am. Thank you. I thank you for the job you're doing, Steve.
That would, you know, and this is where I'm going to put my own prejudices out there. This is why the one church plan or the simple plan, but with the one church plan, you don't have to be making decisions in terms of voting to affiliate. One of the challenges with the traditional plan is that when you think about this, any church that does not stay within the denomination loses its federal tax ID or its federal tax exemption, its local tax situations. If you don't have, like right now, if you even want to become if you want to start a nonprofit, you have to have bylaws and everything. Churches don't, because we have our bylaws. It's called the Book of Discipline. You just, hand that in, and almost every state I know of, when you say it's the Book of Discipline of the United Methodist Church, they go, oh yeah. They may not know what's in it, but they know it's common enough.